us through her vast experiences that she's had in the past while she's been doing, biostatistics. And I will give a little background on Dr. Taya Collyer in a second. But what I want to do is I actually want to start off with acknowledging the country today. I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I extend their respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today and wherever you're watching. Okay, so before I go and start talking about Dr. Taya Collyer's background, I would like to just let you guys know that you can actually express your interest to present, give a seminar, workshop, short talk at any level of art. It doesn't matter if it's beginner, intermediate, or whatever you want to share with us. You can actually use our expression of interest form, and I'll share that link with you in the chat soon. And from there, you can just fill in the form and give us your details, and then you can also have your give your own presentation at Our Ladies Melbourne. If you are wondering if this session is recorded, or if you want to find our previous workshops or any of the materials that we have for the past and today, you can actually go to our GitHub. We also have a new website that's just recently launched, and you can also go to our website as well and find all of the details and links that's available to you there. You also can find us on Twitter, GitHub, Meetup, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So we're everywhere. You can't miss us. You'll see us, wherever you go, because we have we'll be available, on all of these platforms. So follow us if you're interested. And now let me just introduce Dr. Taya Collyer. She's a biostatistician and a public health researcher. She holds degrees in economics, biomedical science, and biostatistics, as well as a PhD from the University of Edinburgh, Scotland. Taya is currently based at Monash University's Peninsula Clinical School, providing statistical support to the hospital-based academic unit, to clinicians within the health service, and to the federally funded National Centre for Healthy Aging located on site. So Taya, we're so happy to have you here today. And I'm going to just leave the podium to you, and good luck. And I hope everybody enjoys the session. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Evie, for that lovely introduction. I hope I can manage to share my screen.
Yes.
Always a bit of a gamble. Okay. How's that? Does that look okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to give this talk. This is a topic that I think a lot about, and I think it turns out to be a topic that a lot of people are interested in. As Evie mentioned, I'm a biostatistician, but I've worked in like bank stat and a little bit in government too. So these experiences, I'm trying to draw on a wide range of settings, because it's not everyone's an academic. I forget that sometimes. And I see some familiar faces on the call. I see some very experienced statistical consultants on the call. So that's terrifying. And please chip in, folks, if you have additional insights. Okay, let's go. Doing analysis for others. As I mentioned on Twitter and have had some great back and forth in the last week or so, this is not a talk for statistical consultants. Right, there are plenty of forums for people who really specialize in like the high performance analysis for others space. Plenty of spaces for them to catch up and have a coffee, talk about the challenges they face. They can probably look after themselves. But I suspect that the majority of analysis that's done for others in academia and also in business contexts, that analysis is done by people who don't go around calling themselves consultants. It's done by pretty junior, relatively junior staff. And so there's a power dynamic there that can create some challenges and tensions, and I'll be focusing on that in this talk. I'm wondering what you're expecting from this talk. You're maybe hoping for some sweet code management tips and some how-tos, and probably expecting me to bang on a lot about the importance of a reproducible workflow. And that is all very important, but you won't really be getting that from this talk. It's sort of like very nitty-gritty level advice, trying to keep it quite general. And in addition, I'm not even going to be focusing that much on the technical aspects of performing analysis for others, because in my experience and also in the experience of other statisticians that I talk to, it's the interpersonal stuff that is more important, really, in terms of a project succeeding. This isn't the same as me saying that the technical, like, actual analysis isn't important. Clearly it's important, but you know, if the technical side of an analysis goes wrong or there are unexpected difficulties, if that's happening in the context of very clear, manageable interpersonal dynamics, then what you have on your hands is a technical problem to solve. And if you're, you know, a data analyst, then you're probably pretty good at solving technical problems, and you can probably solve it by yourself, just with enough time. However, if the interpersonal dynamic of collaboration breaks down, then what you've got is a potential professional disaster. And it's also likely that you, especially if you're relatively junior, will be unable to resolve that by yourself. And so what I'm focusing on are the strategies that I have developed during my career to try and put things in, organize collaborations in such a way as to minimize the chance of this really going haywire. So what do I mean when I say consulting and collaborating? I'm just talking about, very broadly, you're doing analysis on someone else's data as part of a project that's not your project. So a very broad remit. There's a whole rainbow of possibilities here in terms of the project itself, but that's sort of that's the scope. And when you read articles or papers about advice for doing this kind of work, I think there are assumptions that are made about the reality of doing this work that maybe we need to question. So the way that I tend to encounter as people think about this is there's a kind of faceless, genderless person who has requested one analysis, and then another like faceless, genderless person says yes, and that's that. We don't tend to acknowledge much complexity around how these arrangements come to pass, or any hierarchies or power differentials that might be at play. In my experience, this is not reality. It's much more like this kind of scenario. A professional environment is made up of intersecting priorities and money, and everyone's got their own set of projects that they're trying to manage. Everyone has their own priorities, challenges, time constraints, long-term goals, short-term goals. So it's a bit of a frenzy at times. And if we don't acknowledge that, then we can't give very good advice about how to perform statistical analysis in an environment, right? Analysis in this environment is pretty straightforward. You just do it. But analysis in an environment like this is not straightforward. And so we'll acknowledge that this is the world we live in sometimes. And in general, the social dimension of statistical work is very neglected. Consultants and biostatisticians, when they get together, really snark. And I think that's because that's the hardest part of the job, is that social dimension, and finding others to chat about that with and bend to bid and get some tips is challenging. So it's really nice to have this space to talk about these issues tonight. I am going to try and keep all the academic sociology that I like to do about statistics to myself and focus on the tips. But I do think it's pretty obvious that the big controversies that emerge in data science or emerge in statistics They usually, they surprise everyone, catch everyone off guard, because it's a transition from this model of analysis to this sort of like free-for-all model of analysis. So we're going to situate ourselves firmly in the scary reality. Okay, so the plan is for me to share with you my list of things that you should probably work out before you agree to engage in a collaborative analysis project. I also have a little list of things that you should anticipate go wrong on any collaborative project, and I have some sad examples from my own career, which I'll share. And then I'll finish up with just some pure like hot tips that I really wish someone had posted to me a couple of years ago. That would have been really handy. Before I get going with all this talk about what can go wrong and what can be difficult, I think it's important that we remember that often it's not so bad. Don't let this talk frighten you away from collaborative opportunities. If you are curious about them and you want to pursue them, there is a lot to gain from collaboration. You can gain exposure to different kinds of data, to different methods. You can expand your network. It's even just a chance to demonstrate your skills in a slightly different way. It can be quite refreshing professionally, and you never know where that will take you ultimately. So don't let me freak you out. But it is very important that you can go in with your eyes open, sort of what you're getting yourself into, because we've all been there, right? Okay, so you're minding your own business at your desk, and then someone sends you an email and is like, hello, I'd like some help with my amazing project. Can we organize a meeting to talk about it? I think working from home, it's even more difficult to be able to sound off with others, and you find yourself in a situation where you've got to respond to a request for help or an invitation to participate in something, and it can be difficult to resist the temptation to just immediately say yes to everything. I know I do that. So what might be a process that you can work through before you decide whether a particular opportunity is going to be a good opportunity, or even whether it is an opportunity? We'll get to that. Okay, so stuff you should know before you say yes and start. And I just can't emphasize this enough. You don't have to immediately say yes and start. I think I spent, at the very beginning of my current role, I just said yes to everything and immediately started everything. And that was so stupid. So point number one, you can just say, actually, this isn't for me. Or maybe, we'll get to that. Sometimes you can't say no, and that's a bummer. It's complicated. All right. So the standard statistical consulting advice applies and is like reasonable. For a start, don't be rude to anyone. Know your worth is something that always comes up in these articles and these talks, which, I mean, I think this is quite obvious, but also I don't know what this means in practice. I don't know how to respond to that email I got on the previous slide in a way that acknowledges my own work. I find that a bit fuzzy. There's very often advice to set firm boundaries, and we'll get to that. And setting up a formal client agreement at least in consulting advice papers and talks is very strongly advised. And look, that is great advice for sure. But I feel like that advice doesn't apply to me. And has only very recently do I feel like I can #know my worth and set firm boundaries. I think there's a whole class of person out there who's doing analysis for other people who just doesn't have the capacity to do that. And so the advice we give should maybe acknowledge them a bit. So this paper from Russell, advising the potential statistical consultant, yes, reinforces that we need to treat everyone with respect. I find it kind of alarming how often this comes up in these papers. Statisticians, be respectful. Don't use excessive jargon. That's a good tip. But you also see tips like this. Like, do maintain your integrity and ethical standards. Okay, That seems like a kind of fishy dot point to be spruiking. And I think it's this kind of advice that really hints at how difficult it can be. I think, this do maintain your integrity and ethical standards really foreshadows that you might be challenged on that front as part of your collaborative work. And in my experience, that is true. So this advice, the standard advice, as I said, I think it's for these people. It's not for necessarily people who are really working in a large organisation and are experiencing pressure. And really, this all wraps up into this idea that we don't do statistical analysis in a vacuum. We do it in what's called the social field or the social arena. And that is fancy jargon, which I was just instructed not to use. But that's just a setting in which social agents and their positions are located. And our experience of anything is not, we shouldn't expect that to be constant across the entire social field. It depends on your position. So what on earth am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that in the arena of, for example, this battle, we have people here who are having very different experiences because we have people here who are in very different positions. And we need to give some advice which is perhaps more nuanced and is attuned to the fact that analysts are in different positions out there in the world. Advising this person to set firm boundaries, like, that's insane. And if you're if you're working with like a literal king in a tent or whatever the equivalent is in your organization, you're not going to ask them to sit down and hash out a client agreement. Like, you're probably just going to do whatever they say. So this is the real world that we live in. Okay, so I think there are three key questions that you need to answer before you become the analysis person. And all of this relates to what I was just talking about. Don't immediately say yes. Can't say that enough. Boy, I wish someone had just sat me down and told me that 2 years ago. That would have saved a heap of time. You need to understand first what it is that you're going to be doing. And I don't mean by that the technical details of the analysis. I mean like understanding, by collaborating, what is it that you're achieving for yourself, for your team, for someone else. Try to get a hold of those dynamics, and I'm going to talk about that a bit more in a second. More importantly, really, is understand why you're doing it. Be able to explain and justify the time that you're about to sink into this thing really clearly. And if you can, try to understand the strategic importance of the outcomes for you, again, for your team, for your supervisor, and for your collaborators. Because if you can get a handle around that, then decision-making will become a bit easier for you. And if you're doing really well, you can have a think about whether and how you can exit this collaboration should you decide that you want to. This is the hardest one for sure, but ideally you have to think about that. All right, so this might seem like a weird approach to data analysis, and but I really do think that in my experience, this is the key. This is the key. It slows down the first little phase of a collaboration. Instead of you just hitting reply and being like, sounds great, when do I start? You do a bit of thinking, perhaps you even have some conversations around the points I'm about to go through. And usually slowing things down just a fraction at the beginning of a new collaboration is a really good idea for you. Of course, there are exceptions. There are times when it's ridiculously inappropriate for you to like raise all of these questions you have about the strategic importance of outcomes. Like if your CEO or your head of school taps you and says, hey, I need this analysis, like you probably do it. But most of the time I found that this is helpful. Okay, so what do I mean by what sort of thing? What is it that you're doing? I mean socially. Is the project, for example, business as usual? Are you doing something that is literally like within your job description? If that's the case, it's pretty straightforward to justify and understand. You might be doing someone a favor by helping them out with some analysis. And that's also a great reason, a great reason to involve yourself in someone else's data. If they've really helped you out in the past, you've got an opportunity to help them with some skills that you have, that's great. Caution though, you do need to check in and ask yourself, like, are these apples and apples here? Just because someone like replied to an email that you sent 6 months ago, that doesn't mean that you now need to do 60 or 70 hours worth of work. And so that's a potential trap to take a second to ask whether you're really, it's balanced. Are you exploring an opportunity? And this is, I think, the toughest one, because there are genuinely amazing collaborative opportunities. You might see a chance to try a new method, or to really dig into a new method that you sort of theoretically kind of know how to do something, but you've never actually done it. And if a collaborator comes along and offers you a chance to get some practical experience with that, and you think that would round out your CV in a nice way, then like, wahoo, that sounds fab. You could also be applying your usual analytical methods in a new context. If you're a finance analyst and you get a chance to work on some financial health data, that experience is actually quite hard to get. And so, you might think wow, this is a great opportunity. This is going straight on my CV. Like, where do I assign? The problem is that every single person is going to explain to you how much of a massive opportunity their project is. And being able to distinguish a genuine opportunity from a bit of a sell, that's so hard, especially if you're very early in your career, and especially if like the person in the tent is the one doing the selling. So that's tough, and I'll keep coming back to that over the next few slides. The opportunity, that's a tough one. You might be doing what I call a second-hand favor, which is where it's not that someone helped you out and you helped them out. It's not like they scratched your back earlier and you're going to scratch their back this time. It might be that the back scratching is actually occurring at a different level of your organization. Like, your boss might owe someone else's boss a favor, and so then you've been dunked in, you've been identified and dropped in, sort of at a distance into the project. That's also a great reason to do some analysis, right? I mean, ultimately, most of us work in teams, and if it's to the benefit of our team that we help out this other team for some like lofty reason, okay, cool. But that can have its own circumstances when the decision to get in there is actually not within your control. The whole project might be a hangover from the person who was previously in your role, and that's why you're in it. And again, you've had no choice in the matter at all. That's okay. It's important that we finish things that are important to our bosses and to our groups. But again, there's a challenge there because you've basically got no control whatsoever, and probably no exit strategy in that circumstance. Another one that happens in biostatistics, like sadly frequently, is you might be mounting a bit of a rescue operation. There might be a project somewhere in the organisation or somewhere in your network or in your boss's network that's that's really in peril of some kind, and you've been identified as a person who can perhaps go and help salvage something that's going badly. These are genuinely great opportunities, I've found. If you can like ride in on the white horse, sort something out analytically, and resolve some distress, professionally, that can be really great. I also like weirdly enjoy like fire rescue statistics, but again, there's a like stepping into a potentially volatile and emotional set of circumstances that carries with it some difficulties. So you can see there's a whole spectrum here. You might be literally just doing your job and it's just a different spreadsheet and off you go. Or it might be a whole potential highly strung mess. But it's even more challenging than just identifying. It's even more challenging than recognizing that diversity, because as an early career analyst, I was almost always wrong about what I thought I was doing off this list. I had projects where I thought I was being instructed by my direct supervisor to perform analysis for someone, and so I went into a meeting and I did like months of work on a project. But actually what had happened was my boss thought that they were just flicking me a potential opportunity, and they didn't care whether I did it or not. And so I think when you're starting out, it's so easy to get confused and to be wrong about what you think you're doing. Very often you think you're exploring a great opportunity for yourself, and then it turns out you're doing someone a massive favor. Maybe it's both. But just acknowledge how challenging it is, and acknowledge if you're early that you might be wrong, and you can always loop someone else in and just run it past them. Hey, this is what's being suggested. Do you think this sounds like a great opportunity for me, or do you think that they are desperate and really need someone and will say anything? Just acknowledge. It's really tricky. I've been wrong at least as often as I've been right about why I've gotten into a collaboration. I spent forever on this slide, but this is the tea. This is where it goes wrong. Okay. Even if you've managed to identify the dynamic of the collaboration that you're about to kick off, if you can, spend some time thinking about the strategic importance of that collaboration for the person that is asking you to do it, for you, and then also for the people to whom you're accountable for your time. Because it's all very well for Taya to go off and do some weird exotic collaboration for some group, but if that's just eating my time and I'm not then available for the stuff that I'm maybe supposed to be doing, then that won't be good. So trying to align as much as I try to align as much as I can, the sort of vague strategic importance of the analysis that I'm doing. You can't make any connection between this collaboration and the work, the usual work of your group. That's maybe a red flag, I would think. Okay, in preparing these slides, I actually ended up doing like a whole 2x2 wahoo. And this got really complicated, but I still think it's helpful. I know you've all got your cameras off. So if anyone's out there like experiencing profound distress about the depth on this slide, please let me know. But often we assume, and in this like stick figure model of statistical collaboration that I presented, we sort of assume that only this space exists. We assume that people only collaborate on stuff that is of very high importance to all of them, and we all, are desperate to achieve our aims together and go off into the sunset or whatever. But that is pretty rare, to be honest. That both you, the random analyst who has been obtained somehow, and the collaborators who control the data or collected the data or want the analysis, perfect alignment there, but an agreement from everyone that this is a high priority. That doesn't happen very often. It's pretty obvious that when it does happen, it's amazing because you've got alignment, everyone's working hard, everyone's engaged, and if there are challenges along the way, you can bank on your collaborators and they can bank on you because you're all invested. So that's sort of the ideal. Something might be really important or interesting or potentially beneficial for you, but it might be of low importance to your collaborators, to the people who have the data. And can you see my pointer? Evie, can you see it, or am I waving at no one? Yeah, great, fab. Okay, so this is, as I highlight here, potentially awesome, because if you've identified something that's really close to your heart, amazing, and these other people have these data and they want to work with you, you can like scoop all of the win because they clearly don't care about it really. However, it can get complicated and it can get disappointing because if you don't have control of the data set, if you don't have control of the budget for the project, there's always the chance that the parts of the analysis or the parts of the project that are most exciting to you, those might get cut. And this happens in academia kind of sadly regularly, particularly with interdisciplinary collaborations. You're bringing on like, a geospatial expert because on your grant, someone wanted to do some cool geospatial piece as well as a traditional epidemiology or public health piece. That sounds amazing, but then once the rubber hits the road and the budget starts to run out, what gets cut is not the core. And the core is of high importance to the collaborator. And you may find that the stuff you were most excited about just gets binned. And that can be very disappointing, particularly if you've also invested, you've invested a lot of your time. So just recognize when you're in this kind of situation, you are super jazzed about what you're about to do, but the collaborator is mostly interested in some other aspect. If you're like a nice add-on, that can work, but it can get disappointing. That can get complicated. I'm just checking my notes. Yeah, that disciplinary hierarchy in academia too is like a whole other talk, but that can play out in that space. All right, what if no one cares? And this can happen. I feel like maybe non-statisticians and non-academics or non-analysts are at a loss to explain how this happens, but it does happen. The like hangover from the previous person in my role project, great example. Maybe the project's just so old and no one cares anymore, or the person who cared left, or the field's moved on and it's no longer interesting. This is a real problem. I feel like there are just no winners here. And some great advice that I got in my career is that every project you work on should be someone's first priority. If there's literally no one on the team for whom this project or this analysis is a top priority, there's not going to be any internal drive. It's constantly going to be pushed down everyone's to-do list, including yours, because you don't care. It's of low importance to you, and that's fine. And what I find on projects in this space is that things slip through the cracks. If no one is really motivated on it, that highly detailed cross-checking of stuff and alignment of stuff can go undone, and that can be very frustrating. And at the end, even if you smash it, it's not super rewarding for you because it's of low importance to you. But like the boss doing some other boss's boss a favor situation, maybe that's why you're doing it, and that's fine. That's why it's helpful to understand why you're doing it in the first place. So if you're in the unrewarding zone, you knew that before you went in, you understand the payoff in the broader spectrum of things, so you plod along and get your bit done. The interesting part is when something's of pretty low importance to you, but it's of pretty high importance to your collaborator. I've termed this the agony zone, but it's also a very high reward zone of collaboration. And I would say that the best collaborations I've been a part of are in this space, something that initially I was like, what? And something that's with a very highly motivated collaborator, someone who will really draw out of you stuff you didn't even know you had. That can go very well, and it can also go very badly. So yeah, this is really tough. If you're entering a project like this, where it's sort of low or minimal priority for you, but a very high priority for someone else, you should be pretty clear about why you're doing it. If low priority for you, a low priority for your team, like what are you doing? Be ready to justify that. Do I actually sit down and analyze all of my collaborations in this way? No, that would maybe I will now after putting these slides together. But it does help. And I'll just say, like, so what's an example of something that's low importance to you, high importance to someone else? It means that if there's a big delay in the project, if these technical difficulties start to stack up in this zone, right, it's very important to your collaborator that it gets done. And so they will hound you. It's of low importance to you, so you're not particularly driven. It's of low importance to your team. They're going to be like, what are you doing? And so this is kind of the worst case scenario where you feel obliged because it's of very high importance to your collaborator to get it done, but you can't actually make a decent case for all the time you're spending on it. And that is the agony. And this happens in biostats often. Okay. No zone is out of bounds, though. I want to make that very clear. There's potential for wins everywhere in this 2x2, but if you can get a sense of where you are before you even kick off, you go in with your eyes open. You might, you've jackpotted here. This is a win for everyone. You might be like, oh, no one cares, but at least like some higher up argy-bargy will get resolved. I understand, I'll just do it. Yeah, helpful. Okay, and so again, the why is more important than the what. And you really, ideally, and I realize I consciously ask myself this question. If difficulties arise on this project that I'm about to commit myself to, how am I going to justify my continued efforts on it to myself and to the person who pays my bills? Because that's the tough part. When the rubber hits the road and you're neglecting stuff to get your whiz-bang collaboration going and keep it going, you know, how will you justify that? Or when you're like, have nuked your social life because this thing's blown out and you can't neglect other aspects of your job, you know, is that going to feel worth it? And what I try to avoid is this feeling of like, I have no idea how I got myself into this thing and I don't know how to get myself out. And as an early career analyst, yeah, this happened a lot. Happened a lot in my first 12 months, my first 2 years. Okay, again, so what are some actually practical key questions? Instead of like going to a meeting and whipping out Taya's stupid 2x2 table, which is definitely not going to work for you, what are some questions you could ask? You could ask, and you can actually ask these questions of your team. If you're very early and you're relatively junior, like people will help you. You could have a coffee and ask some of these things. So how is the project connected to the usual work of my team? Why was I put forward as a potential analyst for this project? What a great question. If I'd asked this question on some of my early projects, I would have been told, Taya, you have not been put forward as the potential analyst. We don't expect you to actually do this at all. So that's a good one. Are there wider benefits for our team if I'm successful in this? You know, is this a strategic connection that we're trying to make between parts of the organization, between ourselves and some other organization? Like, because that's fuel for the fire of like, why on earth am I doing this? How much of my time can these people realistically expect? It's hard, but that's a good thing to think about. Are there potential repercussions for me if this goes badly? Either like my own analysis turns out to be garbage, like, okay, I'm willing to wear that. But if you know, if the project as a whole is judged not to be successful, like what will that mean for me? And the key, all of this kind of builds up to, should I be going the extra mile on this project? This is a great thing to think about in advance. And the answers to the questions above will help you answer that, I think. And when, how, and why am I going to get out of this if I decide that it isn't working? It's terrifying the first time that you turn to a collaborator and you say, I'm really sorry. I've already put so much time into this. I don't think I can justify any more time, any more analysis time. Or you just feel like someone who stole candy from children. Like, it's like you're the worst. But you know, there are professional realities, and sometimes that's what you have to do. Sometimes you have to just own up and say, look, I can't keep going on this. So doing the work before you even start, and just thinking to yourself, what might be the triggers, what might be the points at which I bail out of this? And I refer to this as trying to like build yourself a bit of a life raft, bit of a little boat that you can get in and row away. It's big, and I encourage you to think about this before you begin, because it is almost impossible to think clearly about this once the project is a year down the line or 6 months down the line. You know, your relationships with these collaborators will have really strengthened. You've already sunk a bunch of time in, they've already sunk a bunch of time in. So if you're anything like me, you're just going to keep plodding along forever, which I don't recommend. Okay, so to recap, the key questions, and I think I added a fourth one, so now there are 4 that you should be able to answer for yourself before you agree to become the analysis person. What am I doing? Is this a favor? Is this my job? Is this an opportunity, really an opportunity? Is this a secondhand favor? There's a lot of options. What is it that I think I'm doing? And is that accurate? Can I check that somehow with someone in my team or with someone above me? Why am I doing it? What is the payoff for me? or for my team, or for my organization, or whatever. And then thinking about the intersection of the levels of importance here. If it's very important to you, but not very important to your collaborator, that can expose you to a bit of risk, and vice versa. And if you're really a lot better than me at this, you'll have a think about how you could exert the collaboration if you decide that you want to. If you're really gutsy, you might just come out and ask someone that. And depending on the dynamic and how much they need you, maybe you can ask that question. I've never asked that question. Maybe I should. Okay, I hope everyone's okay. I hope that wasn't like weird and wild. I'll move on to part 2, which are, in the context of all of this like social argy-bargy, like what is the nightmare that I've just spent 20 minutes trying to help you avoid? What are the challenges that you might anticipate? And I will say, doing all that great thinking that I just talked about, that doesn't prevent things going wrong. But what it does is it puts you on quite a firm footing to act in a way that's like semi-sensible when and if things do go wrong. You should definitely anticipate technical issues. And the stock standards advice for statistical consultants is assume nothing, which is good advice, but it's impossible to follow really in practice. You don't know what you don't know about a project. And, you know, it's just not practical to be in a meeting and just to be like constantly querying and questioning and critiquing. Really, there's not an unlimited number of questions that you can ask, but there are some questions that you should ask. You should anticipate like Excel madness depending on your field and depending on your preferred analysis package. You should anticipate problems with the formatting of the data, strings, dates, like all the usual stuff. And there are very often delays due to the state of the data once you do get your hands on it, once you agree to analyze it for someone. I don't even notice and I've realized preparing this talk that I build that into my own planning now. I assume that there's a 1 or 2 week delay associated with me not being able to open the data set at all. And the probability of a pristine data set is basically 0. If you do find a collaborator who sends you something that is just like perfection and you can just slurp it in and run your models and then walk away, then like hang on to that person and collaborate with them again. Over time, you recognize who the people are who are gonna really waste your time with rubbish, unclean data, and who are the people who care enough about their own work and care about data and understand data, and they'll make your life very easy, and you can hang on to them. Okay, check your unique identifiers. I come from a health background, so unique identifier usually means patient identifier, but this is true in all sectors. I have gotten to a draft manuscript stage of a project before I realised that we had duplicate human beings in the study, and the whole thing had been analysed on the assumption that every row was a unique human being. And so that was a like literal emergency red button hit. Like we have to repeat everything, we have to restart everything. So that was my bad. But also, the collaborators, at no point in any of our discussion did anyone tell me that there were people who appeared in this study multiple times. So from now on, that's the very first thing I check. Check your unique identifiers. Are they unique if you expect them to be? Dates are a whole thing. I'm happy to deal with my own stupid dates that don't make any sense, but there's something about other people's trashy dates that is even more infuriating. So just expect that. Set some time aside for it. Ask questions about dates if you can. Also, more generally, you should anticipate pretty poor task definition. And by that, I mean, not everyone's going to be on the same page about what analysis even means, right? If 80% of the work we do is data cleaning and data prep, then like that's a lot of work. And so for some people, data analysis includes data cleaning and data prep. And for other people, data analysis is not that. It's like the little glory bit at the end. and in my research about statistical practice, this is something I've found again and again. People in different disciplines and in different fields have different ideas about what the analysis includes and excludes. So try and get some clarity on that ASAP and anticipate that you need to clarify it. So if the blob on the left is just an execution of a plan that's agreed, that's like that much work. But if it turns out you need to select the statistical method or analytical method or the graphical presentation method, and you need to justify that in writing somehow, and you need to clean all these data and these dates, and then the whole thing has to be repeated 3 times, and then there's very weird requirements around figures, or you have to produce some giant table. I mean, if you're a good R user and you're running your markdown, I'm sure you'll smash it. I am none of those things. So it's good to know as early if you can, what is the analysis made of? Is it purely execution of statistical modeling tasks, or is it like the whole box of chocolates? And then I just have a few technical tips too. I have stopped restricting my analysis data sets, even if the person who I'm working with insists that I should, because I'm at nearly 100% failure rate of collaborators turning around and saying like, oh, can we look at that other data that we had? So if you've got data for 10 years and they like swear on the life of their firstborn that this is a 5-year study, do not just dump that first 5 years in your first line of code, because I can guarantee you'll get an email in 3 months from someone that's like, oh, we've decided to analyze the whole lot. And if you've set up your whole workflow, or even like, for example, maybe it's an analysis of women, it's a focused study on women's health or women's access to healthcare, and you got a data set that was for all genders, you're going to get an email in 3 months. It's like, we've decided to compare women to other genders. Like, and if you've set up the whole thing on the assumption that you're not making comparisons, or that these other groups don't exist, or these other time points don't exist, it can take a lot of work to reverse engineer the complete data set back into your analysis. Do restrict it at the moment of presentation of results, because people change their minds, and people also like to have a look. Be like, can we take a look at the other data? And you're like, no, because I have to read, I have to do a lot of redigging in order to take that look. So now I start out on the expectation that every single thing that I'm sent is a part of the analysis, and I just present the piece that the collaborator currently is interested in, on the expectation that will broaden over time. Definitely assume that figures need to be run multiple times with tiny changes. Figures can be a huge time suck in academia, especially, but also outside. People, it's pretty rare that in the first meeting you're going to have a discussion about how to label the axes. In your very first meeting of a collaboration, that stuff usually piles in a huge volume of detail at the very end. So try to set yourself up in a way that'll allow you to quickly make those changes. And if you're doing academic work, do assume that you're going into the very best journal of anything. And that can mean that your figures need to be exported in weird formats, sometimes depending on field. That can create days of work at the very end of a collaboration. Now you've got to work out how to get your figure out in some weird format. So if you can set yourself up, you'll save a lot of work there. Okay. In addition to those technical challenges, you should anticipate some interpersonal challenges too. Anticipate the scope creep. So this is the expansion of your responsibilities as you roll along. It is almost inevitable. And in sort of business management literature, it's acknowledged as pretty much inevitable on many projects. So I don't think you can avoid it, but you can at least try to recognize it when it's happening. I have made this mistake big time. I was offered an opportunity to be involved in a project that had 3 parts, and I was going to be leading one part, which was an analysis of a data set that I'd already worked with, that I was very comfortable with. So I was working away on my part of this 3-part thing, and then I get an email from the lead investigator explaining that it was now impossible for the person who'd been named as leading the second part to do that, and so would I mind doing it? And for some reason, I just immediately responded and said, sure, without taking a second to recognise what was actually happening there, which was a just, you know, huge expansion of my level of responsibility on the project. I didn't even stop to think for literally 1 second what I was agreeing to, and it just turned into a nightmare. And sometimes things become blurred, and sometimes the scope does expand because there's a genuine lack of clarity or understanding. It's not like malicious all the time that you find that initially agreeing to do some analysis, other data sets are brought in or other questions are asked, and there's a sort of natural like broadening of what you're up to. That's not necessarily like red button stop territory, but do know that people will occasionally use that to get things off their plate and onto your plate. And the more competent you are, and the more you are the kind of person who just gets on with stuff, the more vulnerable you are, and no one tells you that. The better you are at your job, the more people will like shove you the things. So do try and be attuned to that. Consultants get to set firm boundaries and avoid this in some extent, because if your consultant spends double the time on the analysis, then that becomes a problem for the collaborator in the form of money. But if you're an employee and you've sort of written a blank check on your time, which really is what you do when you agree to a collaboration, to be honest, that's a very different situation, and you can turn around one day and realize you're like running the entire thing somehow. And if it's a low strategic priority for you, low strategic priority for your team, your boss, that can get really stressful. Okay, so you can't avoid it. It is a natural part of most projects, to be honest, but do try and recognize it. Assume that what's initially proposed or planned is an underestimate of how much of your time is going to be required. Do not immediately and like enthusiastically agree to just doing all the additional things, and get advice from your team if you need it. If I had shown the email that I got to a couple of my senior colleagues in my team, they would have sorted me out, and I wouldn't have ended up in the situation I ended up in. And I think, your mentors and your senior team members, they know how hard collaboration is. They'll be really willing to help. Okay. Some final interpersonal challenges to anticipate is a disconnect between the aims and the data. Very few people actually look at data in big organisations, and unless you're talking to someone who looks at the data, you can't really know what you're working with until you see it. Sometimes what's planned is impossible, and that's tough news to break. Collaborations often struggle with project management support. There's not that resource underneath to ensuring adherence to timelines. If they didn't manage to resource someone to do the analysis before they emailed you in a panic, they probably haven't got a great resource for a project manager, and that can get, you can find yourself as the data analyst doing some project management in terms of chasing people for things, trying to stick to timelines. Takes a lot of courage to let a project like go over the cliff in terms of timelines, but sometimes that's the best option for you. You should anticipate a lack of awareness from your collaborators about how long data analysis takes. So do stand your ground in any conversation there. You know how long things take. And also expect a lack of recognition for your heroics. I was sent a data analysis, a data set for a time series analysis that was not a time series. And I executed some wizardry to really quickly squeeze that into the right format, and no one even knew what I was talking about, and no one cared. So before, if you're going to sink a lot of time and effort into some heroic effort, make sure it's worth it for you, because you can't rely on collaborators to recognize it. So this is what I've discussed. Anticipate issues with data, anticipate poor task definition, anticipate some scope creep, anticipate a disconnect between the plan and what the data can support, anticipate that you probably won't be very well supported in terms of project management, and some limited for your heroics. All right, nearly done. Sorry, I think I'm running it over. I just have some pure hot tips to finish up. The first is to schedule a data handover meeting. Someone did this to me when I was asking them to collaborate, and it blew my mind. So instead of letting someone just drop the data in your inbox and then vanish, actually have a meeting and have them email you the data during the meeting and open it and talk to them about what you see in there. You can save yourself a lot of time checking your date formats, checking your string formats, checking, are the variable names bananas and you can't understand anything. You can save yourself like 15 or 20 back and forth emails by just scheduling a half-hour meeting to go through it. If they really need you and want you to do the analysis, someone should be able to spare that half hour. Do yourself a favour. And I find any delay in me raising those initial questions, if it's taken me 2 weeks to open the data set and then I have to ask a bunch of questions, I feel bad. And so maybe I'll just try and sort it out by myself. Whereas if you're right in there with those questions early, you can feel a bit more empowered to push back a bit and ask for some cleaning, maybe. You can, at any point that you're doing analysis for someone else, you can stop and you can send them an email that says, hello, I have become confused or it has become unclear. Can you just send me a list of the stuff that you're waiting for? This is a tip from Andrew Althouse, and this is a game changer. If the project is turning into like amorphous giant blob of hell, it can be really helpful to just send a strategic email and ask someone to give you a list of what they need. It's almost never happened that someone's been able to quickly assemble a list for me in that situation, but it can really focus your collaborators around like, what are we actually doing? What is really important for delivering this project? What is the nice to have, rubbish that we've been asking Taya for that we can live without? Like asking other people to become accountable for your to-do list can really accelerate and help you out. That is legendary tip. And then I have just a few tips for diplomatic communication because I get asked about in academia, in academic projects, I frame everything that I can in terms of what I'm worried a reviewer is going to care about, because my collaborators tend to be very concerned about that too. So I say things like, if I was reviewing this study, I would be worried that blah, 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 blah. And that can really help people start to think about how the project will be perceived in the end and can help streamline the project in a direction that you want it to be streamlined in. I also really like describing things as odd. Like if something is really not right, I usually just say, oh, this might strike readers as a bit odd. That can be quite a diplomatic way to start a conversation about something that isn't right or isn't appropriate for the question that's being answered. So, for example, it might strike reviewers as a bit odd to have not compared the groups directly when that's the stated aim of the analysis. This is a real example, and this is a strategy from Professor Catherine Smith, who I realise in hindsight used this on me for 4 years when I was doing my PhD. And then finally, communicate by asking questions. If it's clear no one has thought about how to handle missing data, for example, in the field I work in, it's very important that we account for missing data. And I just come out and say, how will we be accounting for missing data on this project? And then you enjoy the silence and hopefully they work it out. Or how should I, in my analysis, be accounting for patients who died during this study? That's another thing that people almost never think about. But if you're asking a question, it's better than coming in with like, you boneheads haven't thought about missing data. Or like, no, this is inappropriate because you haven't got a plan for your missing data. You can be quite hostile. I find asking questions works quite well. Beginning a conversation is a good time. So in summary, get your head around those key questions. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? What's the strategic importance for me, for my team, for this collaborative team? And do I have an escape plan? Because if you don't have an escape plan, right, that kind of changes everything. If you know that going in, that you are in this for the long haul, then that, that changes your approach. It's good to know in advance. Anticipate those common technical and interpersonal challenges, especially scope creep, and how you try to recognise that and try to plan for it. Schedule yourself a data handover meeting. It'll change your life. Stop if you need to and ask for a task list or a list of deliverables to encourage your collaborators to get themselves together. and try to develop your diplomatic communication toolkit if you can. That's a tough one, really tough. You will get good at it. It took me 2 years to have any confidence at all, but it does happen. You will develop a nose for the collaborators who are really good to work with. You'll develop a nose for the projects that are just not for you. And I'll just close by saying that maybe the king in the tent is you, because we underestimate the value of our skill set. An advanced data analysis or statistical analysis tool set, that is powerful. And when I do research with academics, they tell me that they are desperate to work with a statistician. They are desperate to work with good data analysts. And just because someone's the head of your school or the head of your unit doesn't mean that in a one-on-one meeting with you about data analysis that you haven't got really substantial power and influence. You can choose to step into that and exercise that if you want. So don't forget that even though you might be quite junior in the big collaborative spectrum on a project, you know, being the analysis person is actually quite a powerful person to be. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Taya. It was emotional for me because it just brought up lots of memories, maybe say a little trauma, you know, the things that we got stuck with. I definitely appreciated. I think the tip that I most connected with was, you know, when you ask people, what are we actually doing? What are my tasks? You know, because sometimes we end up in those type of planning meetings or progress meetings, and then all of a sudden I find myself hearing about some imaginary stuff, and then I'm like, what is going on? And then it actually dismantles the whole thing when you're asking, okay, but where's this gonna go? So I'm gonna see if we have any questions in the chat. Okay. So Mirren is, I think she mentioned that she received a project, and I think she's doing a PhD, but feel free to correct me. And I think she delivered a project, and they kind of like underestimated the timelines, and they're like, I'll do this in 2 days, like data cleaning. And she was asking about how do we discuss our boundaries around hours giving to the project from the perspective of your manager and PI. I'm assuming PI is a project investigator, is it? Please let me know. Not good with acronyms.
Right. Okay. So here's you've been pitched an opportunity here, which is an easy 2 days of data cleaning and descriptive analysis, right? And you know, you suspect it's not going to take 2 days. You suspect it's going to take forever. Yeah, that's a tough one, and well, actually, no, I don't think it is that tough. Maybe there's an answer, but recognizing it on the way in is half the battle, and recognizing that this is not like the amazing opportunity of a lifetime. Also, well done. It's really easy to give advice when you're not aware of the whole carnival of fun. What I might do, and I was a PhD student in 2020, not that long ago, and it is challenging. That's a particularly tough one. If your supervisors are somehow involved, that's like a whole other thing that gets tough. I might offer up then my 2 days, if that's what's being budgeted, and I would make very clear that that's what I have to offer, and that's what will be executed. And at the end of the first day, I'm going to check in with you all, and I'm going to give you a sense of where I'm at. And so maybe the 2 days need to occur in separate weeks. So you can do 1 day, provide an account of how far you got and how bad it is, and say that you'll continue with the second day next week unless you hear otherwise, and give those investigators an opportunity to have a hard look at themselves and reevaluate. And then the worst thing that happens is you get your 2 days work, and you haven't then been saddled with the deliverable that's completely ridiculous. So agree to your 2 days, but don't necessarily agree to delivering a beautifully written and beautifully presented set of results in 2 days, because that doesn't sound like it's feasible.
Mhm. Yeah, that's actually great advice. It almost makes me think, before we say anything and agree to anything, it wouldn't be amazing if we actually had a look at the data and have like a discovery time,
Yeah.
so that we
Oh,
can
yeah.
gauge how long actually this will take. And that kind of what makes it so challenging, because people will come to you and they're like, oh yeah, it's like, yeah, you'll do it, you know, it's just, you know, you're just gonna make it, you know, this format, and it just needs, you know, do that, clean it up, you know, it's fine, it's
Yeah.
in good shape.
Yeah.
But then
It
reality
is.
is totally different, right? Do
Yep.
we have any other questions from the chat?
What about your question?
Which tip was so exciting in the chat? I'm really keen to know. If someone can let me know. Whatever happened at 6:28 went well. Let me know. Sorry, Shazia.
I think it was the first one you shared from memory.
Oh yeah, your data handover meeting.
I was just saying Evie had a question in the chat, so I wonder if you want to ask it for everyone to hear and answer.
Yeah. Well, I was kind of engaging with the chat and also, you know, getting excited and riled up myself here, because I actually never worked as a consultant, and I was always part of a team with hard deadlines. And I've been in the situations where I was never the decision maker. I never was able to negotiate my time or what I work on. It was just given to me. And I also like took over lots of projects from other people. And I feel like that's actually mainly what I did in my data science analytics career. I would always, you know, get a handover project and I would have the scope creep, but I wouldn't like be able to control anything like that. So I think this is a really difficult question. I don't expect a solution for this, but it happens. It happens to us. And I would be keen to know if anybody else is experiencing this. And when you have all of these constraints where you can't control things, how do you negotiate your hours and your boundaries?
It's really hard. Something that I have found has worked for me when I have been in a situation like that is, rather than like detonating about like, or like rather than raging it out, which is totally an option, I've found that asking someone above me for some assistance in priority setting is a great way to begin that conversation. Like, hello, I've got a lot on my plate this week. Do you think you can spare 10 minutes to help me prioritize? Because that way you've pushed it up in front of the person above you and you're like, this is my reality nightmare. And they have said to you, okay, I need you to focus on the following this week. And so then if that's the right call, if that's the wrong call, at least that's taken out of your hands. I've found that to be helpful. But yeah, as you say, it's a real tough one.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. I think this kind of ties down to the first question that Amiran asked as well. It actually can help negotiate some hours if you can say, well, I'm happy to do this, but I also have these other tasks. So can you please help me choose which one is more important, and then I can get to the other tasks later, or something like that. We have, I think, another question. How to say no to a data analysis request from a client. So I want to ask, is this client an ongoing client or like a new client? Is this someone that you want to have maybe ongoing relationships with? Maybe we can keep that in mind. So how do we say no?
Yeah, that's hard. You can, often I just lie and say I don't have time. or that I don't have scope. I don't have scope. Or what I do say is, if you really want me to do this, then that's fine, but you're going to have to wait until X month. That's worked really well for me actually recently. Like in sort of June, July, I was approached with something that was in the like grey area zone of priorities for me, and so I said, look, if you want me to be the one who does it, you'll have to wait till October. And they said yes. And so I was like, well, okay, great, this is a win.
Yeah.
I don't have, I really did have more capacity later in the year, and so I did it then. And then they got to make the decision about the timeline. They were happy to wait. But if you just don't want to do, like, it is also okay to say, I don't think this is for me. If you're not like burning an important bridge or a bridge that's important to your group, as long as it's all happening in the context of, if need be, do you need to run that decision up to the person above you? Just be like, just FYI, I've been asked to do this analysis. I don't think I have the scope. Is this a really important relationship for us? Is it, do I need to be aware of anything before I say no? Because that way you avoid like your boss getting bailed up in the corridor or something by some angry important person. That can be helpful. But often, depending on the situation, you can also just say, if you're doing someone a favour, if you're in the favour category of activity, it is okay to say no.
For sure. I think I'm remembering that this happened to me when I had to like say no. It was like an internal thing. And then somebody talked to my manager and somehow that like got back to me again and I had to do it. So these type of things also happen depending on where you are, I think. Okay, there's actually another great question and the bane of my existence. Any tips on working with abundant old code?
I'm not very helpful on this one. I'm a bit of a lone wolf in my own statistical practice, sorry. But I think there seems to be a good responses in the chat. Sorry, I can't help.
Yeah. Well, I worked with old existing code. I think probably 60-70% of my work, like in the last few years. And I always, I think my advice is, I don't know if anyone wants my advice, but I kind of have to make it my own and change it and try to write it the way that I understand. I think that would be my advice. And first, try and make the code work. But if it's not like if it's not in a container somewhere, so you might not be able to actually capture what packages is being used. So they might also change. So I think it's quite challenging. So that's why I think the most important thing is understand what's going on in the code and then make it your own and change it if you can. Okay, so I'm just going to see if there's any other questions.
I kind of piggybacked on your advice, Taya, for that question. And I thought maybe similar to the data handover, session, you could potentially schedule a code navigation session just to get a sense for what was the purpose, what is happening with this, what's supposed to be happening here. And then potentially that can help you rewriting. Because in my experience, I've always just rewritten. Like anytime I've ever tried to work off of someone else, like it's just a nightmare. It would actually take less time to just, spend a bit of time understanding what's happening, but then just recode in your own way.
For sure. And sometimes, the code works and there might be some gaps in the logic for me. And those are the places that I change. So if I'm in a time crunch, maybe I just replace something. So for example, I had a code that was written in base R and the plots were in base R, and I'm more familiar with ggplot. And then it turns out base R actually didn't have the thing that I needed to do. It didn't have that flexibility. And then that was an immediate decision for me. Delete all of these base R code and, put, squeeze all of the ggplots in there and customize everything. And that kind of like worked for me. But if you guys have any other questions that you can think of, you can actually have a discussion on our Twitter, because we have like a live tweeting of all of these things, and we can continue our chat there and see what other questions that you guys might have. There's nothing else. I just want to thank you, Dr. Taya Collyer. This was amazing. I just loved it myself, and it was so good to have all of this engagement. So thank you so much for everybody that joined us today. We will be sharing the slides, and the YouTube recording will be available on YouTube as well. Thank you so much, and I hope everybody has a great evening.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank
Come
you so
chat on
much,
Twitter.
Taya. This was just so amazing. Thank you. Take care, everybody. Bye.